Do do do. Bum bum bum. Bum 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 bum. Bum 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 bum. Hey everybody. All of the quick-fingered people getting in here right away. To you I say, let me toast. Let me toast the quick, the nimble, the fast-fingered. Lift your mug to another great day in the golden age. Golden age. Yeah, that's good stuff. Ooh. All right, somebody said they're trying to study for a math test. You don't need that math. Put that off. Doesn't matter. All right, we've got a few different topics. The topics keep on coming. Let's start with military parade. So there are news reports, various news reports that allege that they are confirmed by multiple sources, which say that President Trump has asked the Pentagon to look into, so far it's more of a look into it situation, a military parade for the United States, allegedly based on the Bastille Day military parade in France. Now, I'm calling bullshit on this for two reasons. And this will be a good one to test the persuasion filter. Because, I always tell you that you should look at predictions to see whose filter on life is more accurate. Because everybody's filter can explain the past. After something happens, it's easy to say, the reason that happened was the Russians, the reason that happened was misogyny. You can always explain the past with lots of different explanations. But it's very hard to consistently predict the future, as you've watched me do for 2 years straight. Now, when I say consistently, I mean maybe 80%. I certainly don't get all of my predictions right. I'm simply comparing my method of predicting, on average, with any other method that you might use or see somebody else using. And it's sort of a running, ongoing contest to, oh damn it, Dershowitz is on Fox News. I'm going to turn that on while I'm talking. So we've got sort of an ongoing experiment to see if the persuasion filter, as I call it, is predictive. All right. If it's true that Dershowitz is not on Fox News, they're on commercial. So here's my prediction about the story about the military parade. I'm going to call BS on it, and for two reasons. All right. Now, if you were to not use my two reasons, and you were just to look at the fact that it's been reported and that it's been apparently confirmed by a few different sources, you'd say, well, it's reported, it's confirmed, it's probably true. Let me tell you the two things working against the theory that it literally is, that literally there's an idea to have a military parade in the United States. The first one is that it's what I call too on the nose. That's a Hollywood sort of a scriptwriter phrase. If you're writing a script and you're having somebody act too much in character, just too exactly like the character would act, it doesn't feel real. It's just a little bit too on the nose, they call it. So hearing a story in the news that this particular president, who's being actively accused of being an autocrat, people are accusing him of being a dictator in the making, and they offer as evidence that he's attacking the FBI and the institutions, etc. Now, if that's one of your biggest criticisms, what are the odds that the president, who is, in my view, according to the persuasion filter, one of the best branders and persuaders we've ever seen, not just as president, but as a human being. You've never seen anybody who's better at branding and persuasion. He understands the power of the visual, etc. Now, he would have to know that having a military parade when everybody's when his enemies are accusing him of being an autocrat and accusing him of being a dictator, having a big public visual show that just looks like North Korea would be exactly, I don't know why you're saying that Dershowitz is on, because I'm actually tuned to it and he's not on. Let me see if there's something going on here. Is he on CNN? You're saying he's on Fox News, but he's not on there right now, according to my television. No. All right, I'm going to ignore the people who are saying, I'm on Fox. I'm watching it right now. It's on commercial. All right, so here's my argument that the military parade is probably not being discussed, at least in the way it's being reported. There might be some kind of conversation that sounds like that. But number one, if you were to create a hoax or a prank, the best way you do it is you create something that people are primed to believe. So the best hoax is something that's would be impossible to believe except for the person who's believing it. In other words, an objective observer would say, well, that's not true. I mean, it's obviously not true. Just listen to it. It just doesn't even sound true. But there are people who would believe it, and that's what makes it a good prank. So saying that the President of the United States is going to do something that would be more reminiscent of a communist dictator is so on the nose that it feels more like a prank than it feels like something that's real. All right? Now, some have suggested that it was a way to catch a leaker. In other words, if the news came out, then you'd know who the leaker was because only, one person was told about it or whatever. I'm not sure that's the case. But so first of all, it sounds like a hoax because it's too on the nose. That's always a tell. That's not confirmation that it's a hoax, but it should be a flag, right? When you see something that's too perfectly in character, just the way you would make a hoax if you were going to make one, sounds a little bit too much like The Onion. That doesn't mean it's not real, but it should raise a flag. It should elevate your skepticism. And then the second thing is that would the best persuader and brander in the world make a mistake that obvious? Especially when there are lots of advisors to tell you it's a mistake. I can't believe it. But let me go on record here. I'm going to go on record, okay? I do understand that a visual display of American military might, especially because visual displays are powerful, would be good, let's say, good positioning to show our strength. You could make that argument. You could say that it might make our competitors a little more worried. Maybe that's good. You could make that argument. But overall, the visual of playing right into the hands of your critics, who are calling you a dictator, by any measure would be a serious mistake on the level of persuasion. So I'm going to say that if President Trump goes ahead and pushes for a big military parade, it would be a huge mistake, and I'm going to brand it that way. Unless there's something we don't know about it. There could be, other information that makes it a different story. But I brand it a huge mistake. And therefore I believe he will not do it. But if he does do it, I'm going to stick with my prediction. And I'm going to say, well, he got that one totally wrong. Like totally wrong. It would be about as wrong as you could be. Like on the scale of persuasion mistakes, a military parade would be just a 10. I mean, that's not even in the gray area, in my opinion. And I believe that anybody who is skilled in persuasion would have the same opinion. So that's why I think the story is questionable. All right. There's a funny tweet out today in which CNN's Chris Cillizza, I don't know how to pronounce it, Cillizza. He's quoting another tweet by somebody called Aaron Blake, who is quoting yet another person, Donald Trump Jr. And apparently Donald Trump Jr. was on one of the shows recently explaining why his dad can't be a racist. So this is a quote of a quote from Don Jr. And apparently at some point in the interview, Don Jr. said, quote, "You know, it's amazing, all the rappers, all his African-American friends," he's talking about his father here, "you know, it's all the rappers, all his African-American friends from Jesse Jackson or Al Sharpton have pictures with him." Now that's just part of whatever Don Jr. was saying to defend against the charge of racism for his dad. But Chris Cillizza picks out that quote and then adds his clever little, what would you call it, a put down, where he goes, quote, "I had a black friend in college." Now, nobody said I had a black friend in college. This is a standard criticism that people make when somebody says, "Oh, I had a black friend, so I can't be a racist." The standard liberal response to that is considered the ultimate put down is, "This requires the beard." "Oh, you had a black friend. Oh, you had a black friend. That's your argument that you're not a racist? You once had a black friend?" All right, so Cillizza is just using a very common response to how can I be a racist? You know, my friends are black. And he's saying, "Oh, I had a black friend in college." Excuse. Now, I've got much to say about this. Number one, I propose a new rule. That on the list of evidences for not being a racist, if you were going to rank all the ways that you could not be a racist, and you were to say which ones are the good evidence that you're not a racist, I would like to propose that having at least one black friend should be at the top. As in, like, really, really good evidence that you're not a racist. Doesn't mean you're not a racist. But in terms of evidence, I would put that as number one, right? And by the way, I think we'd all be better off as a country if we put that as number one. If you would like to prove that you're not a racist, get a frickin' black friend, right? David Duke, he doesn't have a black friend. You know why? He's a racist. If you think you're a little bit racist, maybe get a black friend. It might help you a little bit, all right? But why are we making it a bad thing to say that you have a black friend? I get the idea of it, you know, that it's not enough by itself. It's a classic defense. I get all that. But let's be reasonable. If you've got a black friend and you're not black, that's pretty good evidence. It's not proof, but it's pretty good evidence. So let's stop treating it like it's the opposite of evidence. It's not. It's good evidence. Let's treat it that way. So it's sort of a pet peeve of mine that people use this as an attack on people. So I tweeted back to Chris Cillizza's tweet, and I said, I have two questions for Chris Cillizza. Question number one, do you have any black friends? And question number two, do you still beat your wife? Do you notice what those two questions have in common? You can't answer them yes or no. Both answers are wrong. You know, the classic one is, do you still beat your wife? If you say no, it's like you've admitted you used to beat your wife. If you say yes, then you're currently a wife beater. There's no right answer to do you still beat your wife? Likewise, there is no right answer, according to Chris Cillizza, to the question of, do you have any black friends? So I'd like to hear his answer. Does he have any black friends? Because if he doesn't, he's a racist. If he does, he's a racist, according to himself. Because apparently, when you say, yes, I have black friends, you're acting like a racist. So how does he answer the question? I've now publicly asked him the question. Do you have any black friends? How the hell do you answer that question? And by the way, if he says he does have some black friends, I'm going to say, well, that's pretty good evidence. I'm not going to change my vote. If you have a black friend, you're way ahead of anybody who doesn't have a black friend. So if you don't have a black friend, get a damn black friend. You know, it might help you. All right. I would like to also reiterate my 20-year rule. So if you haven't heard my 20-year rule, I'll explain it to you again. It is very popular in the world today to accuse each other of being racist or sexist or some kind of terrible, bigot. I would like to suggest that society is in this continuous process of improvement on those dimensions, meaning that if you go back 20 years or more, everybody was worse. We were all more sexist. We were all more racist than we are in 2018. And when I say we, I do mean everybody. I mean, as a society, just talking about the United States, pretty much everybody was more racist 20 years ago, but they were also sort of the norm, right? There's a norm that people adhere to, and it just improves over time. So here's my rule, the 20-year rule. If somebody did something you don't like 20 years ago, don't count it. Just don't count it. Especially someone in politics, all right? If it's somebody you're considering as a friend, well, I'm not going to tell you how to pick your friends. So if something bothered you about something that somebody who you consider maybe a friend, or even somebody you want to work with, if you want to give them a hard time for something they did 20 years ago, well, that's your personal decision. But when it comes to politics, a lot of our politicians are older people. We have this preference for bringing people into office who are in their 60s and 70s. Every one of those people were worse people 20 years ago. And 40 years ago, they were really worse, right? So I would like to suggest that who people are now is pretty different from who they were 20 years ago on that one dimension, right? People don't change too much in terms of preferences and things like that. But certainly, somebody just said 20 years ago they were making gay jokes. So I'm old enough that I can say 40 years ago I was doing things. 40 years ago, the way people thought about everything from gay marriage to marijuana to race relations to sexism, every one of those topics has changed for the better in the past 20 years. So why can't we give each other sort of a statute of limitations? If you've been a pretty good person for 20 years, I'm okay with you. All right? Can we just let it go? Can we just let it go? The people you like, the people you don't like, the people you don't know, the people you know, can we just let it go? Whatever you were 20 years ago, the whole point of life is to become better over time. So if you're doing everything right, you are a better person now than you were 20 years ago. That would be the example of somebody doing it right. All right? So if you tell me I'd like to blame you for what you did when you were 16 years old, Scott, I would say, well, it's a personal choice. You can, but I'm certainly not that person. You're blaming a ghost. The past doesn't actually exist. The past is just a memory. There are things that exist because of the past, but the past is literally a memory. It's not, you can't touch the past, you can't hold it in your hand, you can't put it in a box and hand it to somebody. The past doesn't exist in the way that the present does. If you're going to judge people, can you at least limit it to, say, the last 20 years, because that's probably a reasonably good proxy for who people are today. But if you go back 40 years, is that really fair? And by the way, I do hold the same standard for Hillary Clinton as I do for President Trump. Anything either of them did 20 years ago, you know, whether it was horrible or not horrible on the social level, you know, not the legal level. If it was illegal, I suppose you got to do what you got to do if the statute of limitations hasn't run out. But for judgments about who said terrible things, who was more sexist, who did things that we wouldn't do today, I say just let it go. It's just not who they are now. What if they committed a crime 20 years ago? If the statute of limitations hasn't run out, then the criminal justice thing can do its thing. And I think it's totally reasonable to judge people today based on a crime they did long ago, if it's an actual crime, right? You do what you will with that. But if you're trying to decide who this person is today, which is different, you know, punishing people for a crime is sort of something we just have to do in society. But judging who they are today by something that happened 20 years ago, that's not good logic. All right, what was the other thing I was going to talk about? I had another... Oh, Memo. Memo 2, the sequel. Now, you probably thought that nothing could be more exciting than a memo. And when that first memo reared its head, we thought, man, this is the most exciting memo I've seen. And now we've got a second memo, Memo 2, the sequel. I can't wait for Memo 2. It's going to be great. I don't know if we'll see it right away. Some people are saying Thursday. I don't know. What about Roy Moore? I just don't care about Roy Moore. Oh, are you asking about the 20-year rule? Well, the 20-year rule, like I said, if somebody did a crime, then I think that's fair to, you know, consider that in modern days. But if the crime was just, not just, but if it was in the categories of sexism, racism, bigotry, that sort of thing, you know, who we are in the past 20 years is a lot closer to who we are than who we are 40 years ago. Yeah, I think, let's talk about that rocket. Elon Musk's decision to send a Tesla into space is just so brilliant. It's just so brilliant. You know, you got to say that, you know, Musk, he seems to do everything right when it comes to the persuasion element of his business. He just gets that right. Being willfully blind to child trafficking for 50 years. I don't know who you're talking about. Oh, there are new texts, but there's new, you know, every time you get new texts, new text messages, in this case from Strzok and his girlfriend, Lisa Page, you know, you're always seeing them out of context, so you don't really know what they're talking about. He'll invent the wheel next. Yeah. You know, one of the things that is really a trap here is that we as citizens are all looking at these deeply technical legal questions. You know, we're all trying to become our own lawyers when it comes to you know, figuring out whether the FISA court should or should not have accepted this. So the latest memo, this is the Grassley memo, says again that the reputation of the the reputation of Steele was used. Let me run this argument by. So I've heard two arguments about whether the dossier should have been included in the FISA application. One argument says that since the FBI did not personally check out the claims of the dossier, that it was inappropriate, maybe illegal, to include the dossier because the FBI was depending on somebody else's credibility as opposed to the FBI's own credibility. And I get that argument. It seems to me that you wouldn't want the FBI just trusting anybody who came in with information. But we do have a special case here. This is a special case in which the FBI had a working relationship with Steele. They had a history with him, and this other part is also special. Steele was an MI6 guy, so he was in the same business. And the FBI would have known that his future credibility, his future earnings potential, this is Steele I'm talking about, would have depended on his continuing credibility. So if you were the FBI and a normal informant came in off the street and said, hey, I got some information, it does seem like that would be totally inappropriate for the FBI to say, oh yeah, some guy we don't know came in off the street, he's making some claims, will the FISA court give us a warrant to wiretap? Well, in that case, no. I don't think they should be able to do that. But Steele was a special case. Steele was a case of being credible, probably on the same level as their own employees. In other words, if you worked for the FBI and you were to look at one of your own agents saying, hey, I looked into something and I got this evidence, or you looked into Steele saying, hey, I looked into this and I got some evidence, it would not be crazy to say that both of them are credible, because in both cases they're professionals who have reputations on the line, future earnings are on the line, you have a history of working with them. Steele did not work for MI6. Do I have that wrong? Do I have my facts wrong that Steele did not? Who was it that worked for MI6? Well, so this, and God knows, I'm sure I got most of my details wrong on, well, he was retired, yes, I know. But in terms of reputation and credibility, he had been in the same business. The president just tweeted about the new texts. Well, I love it when we get a fresh tweet. Let's look at the fresh one. Fresh tweet from the Prez. Okay. Come on. Fresh tweet. The president just says in all caps, which is strange. It's all caps. He goes, new FBI texts are bombshells. So he's talking about the text between Strzok and Lisa Page. And he's also tweeting about the SpaceX launch, as he should. Let me ask you this. I've said this before, but nobody has ever answered this question. So I'm going to put this question to you. You are the FISA judge. All right? So you're the judge, and you've got to decide whether to give a warrant. I tell you, I have some information that comes from a politically motivated source. In other words, it's funded by a politically motivated source. But I don't tell you that that Hillary Clinton's campaign funded it. So you know it's politically motivated, and you know it's anti-Trump. But I don't tell you specifically that the Clinton The Clinton organization paid for it. How are those two things different in your decision? Right? You're the FISA judge, and in one case I've told you it's politically motivated, and you know it's anti-Trump people. And in the other case I tell you it's politically motivated by Hillary Clinton's campaign. How do you treat that differently? I say there's no difference. And so anybody who's saying that you left that out of the application needs to explain how that would change the judge's decision. Because once you've said, this information we know to be politically motivated, it kind of doesn't matter in what fashion it was politically motivated, does it? Because the credibility goes to zero and stays there. Now, if the judge needs it for a context or whatever, then maybe there's a good reason to show it, just so you can say, well, some of it we checked out, but here's the larger body so that you can judge how uncredible it is. This could be the twist coming, and I'm not going to predict this, but I'm just going to throw it out there, because I haven't heard this theory before. If the FBI, listen to this carefully, because this will twist your brain a little bit. If the FBI presented the dossier information to the FISA judge with the intention that that this was credible information and should be seen as evidence to give the warrant, perhaps that would be overselling it, and you could make a case they shouldn't have done that. All right. So if the FBI was showing the dossier information with the point of, hey, this is credible information to get a warrant, that could be a problem. But here's the part nobody's talked about, and you're going to have to see the application to know if I'm right. So I'm not predicting this. I'm just saying, let me throw this out there. The other reason that the FBI could present the dossier, wait for it. What's the other reason they could present the dossier? To tell the judge that the information is not credible. You didn't see that coming, did you? So the most honest thing the FBI could do is say, here's the information we have, and we're going to show you the whole dossier so that you know this is not as credible as it could be. In other words, there are two completely opposite reasons to show the FISA judge the dossier. One is if you're trying to sell the dossier as being credible and part of your application. That's the way it's been reported, and maybe that's the case. The other reason to show the dossier is to show that the information that you're getting is coming from a not credible source. And you think you have enough, but you want to make damn sure that the judge has seen everything you've seen, and so they say, look, we think there's enough for a warrant, and that's why we're asking for it. But at the same time, Judge, you need to see how not credible some of this is. So we're going to show you the whole dossier, so that if you want to reject it because of the dossier, you've seen it. Now, nobody has suggested that's the case, right? But we've also not seen the FISA application. So have we ruled it out? I don't know. That's not how it was used. Well, the only thing we know is how the Republican sources have reported how it's been used. Am I wrong about that? Because we haven't seen the FISA application. We've only seen the Republican explanation of the application. Am I wrong about that? I hear you when you say that theory is wrong. So let me be as clear as possible. I'm not suggesting that theory is correct. I'm suggesting that it hasn't been ruled out. You can't tell me it's been ruled out. You could tell me you don't think it's likely, and I would even agree with you. But you can't tell me it's been ruled out. Those of you who are saying I'm wrong about it, tell me why you know it's been ruled out if the only thing we've seen is the Republican spin on it. I'm not asking you to believe it. I'm just asking you how you could possibly rule it out. To submit unverified info is illegal. All right, so I think that's the Woods rule that says that the FBI is not allowed to present unverified information to FISA. I believe, but I'm not positive because we're all playing, amateur lawyers here. Without being a lawyer, without knowing anything about the Woods rule, I'm gonna make this common sense interpretation. I think that it depends how you present it. If you were to say, let me give you an example. Let's say you had an informant which gave you some information that checked out. You're not 100% sure it checks out, but you're pretty sure it checks out. Would it be fair to present to the judge the informant and what he said and how you vetted it? At the same time you say, but look, Judge, this same informant has given us other stuff that is less credible. Here's an example of the stuff he's given us that was not true. So that the judge could look at the stuff that they've sort of kind of confirmed, but they're not 100% sure, and then the judge can see that in context. Now, if you're telling me that would be illegal, I would say that then they've made it illegal to give the judge useful information. And I don't believe that's the case. I don't believe it could ever be illegal to show information that actually works against the credibility of your own evidence. All right? If you're being as honest as possible about presenting your evidence, and it has a weakness, don't you have to show its strength as well as its weakness to the judge to show the complete picture? I think you do. They fired Steele for leaking to the press, yes. And so he didn't have complete credibility as he might have. Let's move on. They ain't getting it. I think you're right about that. I have not read Dr. Jerome Corsi's article. I don't know who that is. Secret courts have special rules. Could be. Could be. Propaganda is not evidence. Well, that's my point. But the judge should know that, right? So Steele was concerned that the FBI was not taking the threat seriously. That might be true. It might also be true he was being paid by somebody to make it a bigger deal than it is. How would we know? How will this investigation resolve? I think when it's all said and done, we're going to see something that was legal, but just barely. In other words, I'm going to say that what the FBI did, probably when we have the full picture, it's going to be legal, but just sort of barely legal. Maybe some mistakes were made, but they look like just mistakes. But it's going to look sketchy as hell because of the attitudes and the biases we know in the FBI. So I don't think it's ever going to look good, no matter what the outcome is. It'll never look good. It's always going to look sketchy. But I think that it'll either be like a mistake that's technically against the law, or it's almost illegal but not quite. I think it's going to be in that area. All right, what does Dr. Jerome Corsi say? And why is he special? Somebody really wants me to look at Jerome Corsi. Let's see who he is. He's an American conspiracy theorist. You just told me to look at Jerome Corsi. I didn't know who he was. To look at him. And the very first thing that pops up is his description. He's an American author, political commentator, and conspiracy theorist. Come on. Why are you asking me to look at someone who's literally labeled as a conspiracy theorist? I'm not going to read what he has to say. Let me ask you something. About 1,000,000 times people have said to me, what do I think of, QAnon, if I'm saying it right, from 4chan. So there's some anonymous, I guess, poster who posts lots of things, and I've been redirected over there many times. And every time I go look to see what QAnon is saying, it just looks like crazy talk. And I actually can't tell if it's intended to look crazy. In other words, is it just spewing lots of things, sort of like, who is it, Nostradamus? Is QAnon like Nostradamus, where he just says lots of random things and then people pour through it to find out if one of the random things matches what actually happens? It's in code. It's in some kind of weird code. Okay. All right, so let me give you my opinion. QAnon is not real. If you want my opinion, it's not real, and it's not something that you need to pay attention to. Now, I know a lot of you think it's real, but I'm just giving you my opinion. What would be an example of something that QAnon predicted correctly? Somebody says, I can't understand time cube. Well, that's probably true. So he speaks in riddles and acronyms that nobody knows. Yeah, I don't know. QAnon is confirmed. So everything about QAnon, and first of all, the QAnon stuff, I don't think it could possibly be real. You predicted the Hawaii fake alert. Well, I'd have to see that in the context of how many Nostradamus predictions he made. So somebody said there's a new Jordan Peterson hit piece, and that I'm next. By the way, is anybody confused about why I haven't been hit harder? During the campaign, there were quite a few hit pieces that were obviously coordinated. So, I was on it seems to me, I guess I can't prove that, but it seems to me I was on the list of people that, the Hillary supporters were going after to take down. Have you noticed that they've been leaving me alone lately? I wonder why that is. It could be because I'm not important enough, but during the election they thought I was important enough. We see what you're up to. Do you? They were afraid of you. They should be. Let me ask you this. Do you think people should be afraid of me? Oh yeah, I want to see everybody keeps telling me the Rubin report with Weinstein, with whichever not Harvey, but apparently there are good Weinsteins too. And so one of the good Weinsteins, no relation, I assume. All right, so nobody should be afraid of me. Some people say yes. That's funny. All right, I don't have much else to say today. So, I'm gonna get out of here. All right, I'll talk to you later.